How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Red Zone's roster previews episode. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Miami Dolphins. So, if you are new to this series, you can see all the previous episodes in the corner up there. But I am basically revealing my power rankings by going from the team that I have ranked worst, number 32, all the way up to number 1. So this is number 24. The Miami Dolphins, and in each episode we take a look at the team and then we predict who will make the roster, who will have an impact on the team, who will make the practice squad, and who will be cut from the team. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into talking about the Miami Dolphins, and like in the previous episodes, before we start talking about the players, I'm quick going to talk about the coaching. I like Brian Flores a lot as a head coach. I think he is a really good coach that can motivate the players, and I think just overall it's been the quarterback play that he hasn't been able to take his team to the next level and make the playoffs and actually have a good chance. But I feel like this year they have a good roster overall. It's actually pretty decent. They just are looking for that step up from a player that we'll talk about, and you probably know who I'm talking about at the quarterback position, that really I feel like once they figure it out, I feel like the Dolphins can be a contender and make some good playoff runs. So I do believe in Brian Flores. And even if they didn't do well this year, you have to keep him around because he's a good head coach. And I think given some time and given the right quarterback, he could succeed here. So speaking of the quarterback position, let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa, the lefty from the University of Alabama, who they chose high in the draft last year. I liked the pick at the time. I liked Tua. As a fellow lefty myself, it's cool to have a left-handed quarterback in the NFL. But he did not perform unbelievable last year. I think he was very good at times. It was a winning record when he started, but he wasn't elite. Obviously nothing compared to Herbert, and then I wouldn't even say he was close to Burrow when Burrow was healthy. So to me, he needs to take a step up. And I think, looking at the quarterbacks from last year's draft, we knew that Tua was going to take a little bit of time. And so truly, the reason the Dolphins come in at this spot is I'm not super confident that Tua takes his game to another level yet. I believe in Tua. I am not out on Tua at all. I think he still can develop and be like a top 15 quarterback someday. But right now, I think he's going to need to jump in like year 3 or year 4. I just think that he needs more time to develop, and honestly, being a left-handed quarterback will cause his receivers to adjust a bit, and he's a solid quarterback though right now. Like, he is a player that I feel like around the same level as maybe a little below right now, like a Derek Carr, where he's a game manager at the moment, in my opinion, for Tua. I believe his ceiling is a startable quarterback who can carry his team to some wins, but right now, I just don't see it at the moment where he could take this team to the playoffs, even though this roster is actually pretty good. He is the reason that this team is below a few teams that I'll reveal next that are kind of in similar spots, but maybe have a little bit worse of other rosters. I just think that right now Tua isn't quite ready to take that huge jump, but I believe in him for the future, just not this year. So behind him, they bring in Jacoby Brissett from Indianapolis. I thought it was a great signing. I thought Jacoby Brissett was going to have an opportunity to go start somewhere else, but he ends up going down here. Pretty solid choice. I doubt they'll be benching Tua like they did last year when they had Ryan Fitzpatrick. But Jacoby Brissett is a very solid veteran who, I thought could be a fringe line starter. Can start for a few games if needed. Strong arm. It's a solid build. Just, I think, is kind of a little bit what the opposite of Tua almost is. Like, Tua doesn't have an elite arm. Tua's more mobile. But it's kind of nice to have that then, that you have a veteran who, if something were to happen to Tua, and he does have a clear injury history, then you feel confident in your backup quarterback. So I do feel really good about the quarterback room for the future. Like I said, I just don't know if Tua takes that huge step up this year. I also just am not a huge fan of Reed Sinnett at all. I don't know how he's even on a practice squad personally, so I believe he gets cut. So a decent quarterback overall, but I think that is the thing possibly weighing down this team for this year, but in the future it'll be good because they're starting to surround him with pieces, which is what I think, will cause him to develop and take that next step up. The running back position, though, might be the other weakness on the offense, and I think it's going to become a positive in a pretty strong room. It's very depth-filled, but there isn't a star here. Myles Gaskin definitely can develop. I liked him coming out of Washington. Was shocked, he fell in the draft quite a bit. So I feel like he finally was given a bit of an opportunity last year, and he actually performed relatively well. And this year he can take over the reins and step up and perform pretty well in this offense. I think he's going to be the first one to be given the opportunity. I think he's good at receiving, which is great for Tua because he's also a shifty running back, can make some good plays in open space, and is exactly what Tua needs to be a receiving threat, because then they bring in the great complementary behind him in Malcolm Brown, who's been on the Rams for a long time, and he's a power guy. He's going to be able to be that goal line back, short yardage back, which honestly they don't have from anybody else on this roster really, except for maybe like Patrick Laird. So I really think that balances really, really well with your smaller, quick receiving guy in Gaskin, who's going to be given the most opportunity, and in Malcolm Brown, who's going to come in and be the power when needed. They also have Salvon Ahmed, another running back, who was given some opportunity last year and actually showed up and performed relatively well. He's closer to Gaskin than he is Malcolm Brown. His ceiling is relatively high. I do think that he will be given some opportunities this year, but I do think they're just going to let Gaskin take over. Jared Dokes, they ended up picking in late in the draft. I think that's fine for a late round pick, potentially, just throwing more darts at the board. I mean, if you look at the top six, all seven really running backs are within their first few years, except for Malcolm Brown. So they're just going young and they're hoping for something. Like I mentioned, Patrick Laird, he's a power guy. He is not incredibly fast. He's just kind of in between. Like, he's not bad. He's actually relatively performed well, but he just doesn't have any strengths, really. He's just kind of there at everything. Malcolm Perry is such an intriguing player to me. They have him listed as a running back wide receiver. He was originally kind of a quarterback at Navy. Then it was pretty clear he was going to convert to receiver, but then for the Dolphins here, he's actually kind of converted to running back. And I think that is honestly the best spot for him. I just wish, honestly, they didn't bring in like Jared Dokes to really take some opportunities away, because otherwise I think Malcolm Perry could have made himself a spot on the roster. But he kind of right now is somewhere in between where he'd be like their 8th, 9th best receiver, and he's like their 5th or 6th best running back. So I think they want to keep him around because he's an intriguing player, but I just don't see right now a spot for him. Jordan Scarlett, I've never been a huge fan of. And then Carl Tucker is their only fullback on the roster. So potentially, if they want a fullback in this offense, I think they had Chandler Cox, I think, was their fullback for a little bit. So they could potentially keep him, but I just don't think, I think they'd rather keep some other players, which I'll talk about. This team specifically, the way I constructed their roster for projecting who makes it is very different compared to what I normally do. There's a lot of positions where I'm keeping extra guys that I normally wouldn't, and somehow the math worked. So you'll see that. So that's why I just don't think a guy like Carl Tucker makes it. But in conclusion, this is a pretty good running back room. You're going to basically be looking once again for guys to take a step up, specifically Myles Gaskin. I do think he will finally be given the keys to this running back room, and then you have Malcolm Brown as a veteran presence for if you need just some security. So jumping to the wide receivers, as I mentioned, normally I only like to keep 6 at the most, but when you have some players that I think other teams would take in a heartbeat, this is where you begin to keep some more players. Looking at this roster, I have them keeping 7. Let's start talking about Will Fuller. They bring him in over from Houston. He is going to be suspended, I think, the first game of the season, or it might have been the first 2. I think he was given a 2-game suspension, and he served or maybe it was 4, and he served a few last year. But this dude is explosive. As a Notre Dame fan, I watched him in college, And I knew he's speedy. He's very, very good. He's developed. Maybe his hands weren't the best at first, but now I think he's actually really become a player that they can count on. And I think he can be the number one receiver, at least for a little bit, before a guy like Jalen Waddle takes it over, really. But I think Will Fuller is a great fit for this offense because Tua has proven to be successful with speedsters. Having guys like Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle in college. So I do think it's a great fit for this offense, and it truly is a big step up in this receiver room because now you feel really confident in who they have. Devontae Parker, he had a breakout 2019. And then he just kind of didn't do as much last year. I thought he was really ready to take that big step up, but not really. I mean, it was kind of, he was labeled a bust for a bit, and then he developed, and then now he's just kind of a solid receiver. He's probably on his way out, given who else they have on this team. He's aging compared to, even if you look at that bottom row, like Preston Williams and Lynn Bowden. He probably is slowly on his way out, but he does offer a lot of skills. I like Devontae Parker a lot. He's a jump ball receiver, I feel like, at this point in his career. He's not particularly great at speed, which is kind of what you need, given these other two receivers that are, I have on the top there. Fuller's a speedster, and Waddle's a speedster, so to get a guy that can go up and get it, Devontae Parker will be just a solid player at this point, but he doesn't have the upside he used to. And then let's talk about Jalen Waddle. I mean, if you go back in my draft night reaction, that was the first pick. I thought, what? Like, wow. And if I'm being honest, I didn't love Jalen Waddle this year in the draft. I had multiple receivers. I even had like Elijah Moore ahead of him. Rashad Bateman, I think I ended up having him close. Like, they were closer. He was closer to Rashad Bateman for me than he was to Devontae Smith. So I was shocked they didn't take Devontae Smith. I just feel like Waddle does have the speed. His upside is probably pretty high, but I feel like personally he can make some. He's so inconsistent. Like, I feel like he makes some unbelievable grabs, but then he also will kind of drop some passes. I was shocked that he would. I just don't think his route running's quite there yet. So if he can develop that, he can become a pretty complete receiver. But personally, I'm going to go out on a limb and just say that I think in 5 years, the Dolphins will be regretting taking Jalen Waddle over Devontae Smith. So looking at that top row, like I said, you have the speedsters and you have the jump ball guy in Parker. So that's a good balance. You also have Preston Williams, who has not always been on the field. I think he had an injury, but was truly starting to step it up. I liked him coming out of, I think it was Colorado State. And he ends up, when he gets the opportunity, he performs really, really well. He's another jump ball receiver, but a little bit faster to me than Parker. So I feel like Preston Williams can eventually take the Devontae Parker role. And so I think that he's an up-and-coming player that, given more opportunities, I feel like if they didn't pick Waddle, they could have, actually seen Preston Williams break out. Because then they also have Albert Wilson, who, actually I saw a video performed. He had a pretty good play in camp. He, I think, opted out of last season, so he didn't really see him. But he comes back. He's a slot receiver, which is kind of, once again, a position they really need. As I wouldn't say I feel like Waddle will end up playing the slot, but none of those top guys are pure slot receivers. So to have a guy like Albert Wilson makes sense. And then Lynn Bowden, converted, I think the Raiders were going to play him at running back when they picked him in the 3rd round. And then they traded him for a 4th round pick and some other stuff. That was really weird to me. They traded him last offseason after they picked him. You don't see a rookie traded that often. But I think that Lynn Bowden can be a piece in this offense. Kind of could maybe play Wildcat a bit as well. Shifty guy, kind of a converted quarterback out of college as well. So I like them trying out guys like him and Malcolm Perry. And then Jakeem Grant, I just couldn't let go of. This dude is one of the fastest players, I feel like, in the NFL. And at least can offer something on special teams because I just couldn't let him go. If they do decide to let him go, somebody else will take him in a heartbeat. I mean, absolute value if they were to cut him for another team. He's just so fast and explosive. And then they have a bunch of veterans behind him that maybe can compete, but I feel like you'd rather keep the upside in this room. This wide receiver room actually looks really, really good with potential. But that includes Robert Foster, who I have as the only one making the practice squad. I've shocked, the Bills let him go at some point, and then I think the Washington football team had him for a bit. So I feel like he can still be an NFL roster level player. Then there's Allen Hurns, who was, I think, hurt or opted out of last season. I just feel like he's getting pushed out at this point. Mac Hollins made some great plays for this team last year, but same thing where I think he's getting pushed out. The upside is not there compared to who else I have them keeping. And then they brought back Isaiah Ford. I really don't understand that just because they don't have the room for him here. And then I have him cutting some younger guys, Kirk Merritt and Kyle Loxley. So I like this wide receiver room a lot. It's not perfect, but it's very, very good. And I like it because they have so many different skill sets. Like I said, I didn't love the Waddle pick. I feel like I would have personally rather seen guys like Preston Williams and Lynn Bowden step it up and perform well. But Waddle will be a decent player, I guess, in this system, especially having his quarterback back. But I feel like in a few years they'll wish they had Devontae Smith. So a good wide receiver room, and then a pretty solid tight end room as well. I mean, Mike Gesicki for fantasy was pretty inconsistent last year, but in general, he's a very, very good tight end, probably about a top 10 tight end at this point. He's in between a wide receiver and a tight end, really, to me, because he lines up in the slot and out wide. He definitely can. He lines more up off the ball, off the line of scrimmage, really, compared to a blocker. So he's going to be more just a receiving threat. So I think he's really developed, and he can be a sure thing in this offense at this point. It's turned out to be a great pick for them. He offers some speed at the tight end position. I feel like he could be a really good target for Tua. They bring in Hunter Long from Boston College, who I think they'll transition into a kind of a blocker because they have a guy like Gesicki ahead of him, which is also what Durham Smythe does. So maybe one of those two can, get on the field for blocking and also maybe potentially be a receivers. But that third tight end spot is going to be the battle between Durham Smythe and Adam Shaheen. For who can make it, I'll have the other one on the practice squad. So in this case, I have Adam Shaheen. I'm not a huge Adam Shaheen fan, but I think Durham Smythe has proven himself before to be an NFL roster player. They also have Ethan Carter, who played tight end and fullback for the Bengals as well. So he could be, maybe if they want to play him at fullback, but I feel like they have him listed at tight end on their roster, so I feel like that's what they want him to be. So in that case, I don't have him making it. They've recently picked up Carson Meyer. I don't think he's an NFL roster guy, and neither is Chris Myarick. So this tight end room has a good amount of upside. It fits well with Gesicki being a receiver, and then they can transition Long or Smythe into a blocker consistently. So his targets are Tua. I mean, it's pretty stacked. They have a lot of options for him to throw to, so he really doesn't have an excuse for not performing super well, especially when they go out and they upgrade the offensive line. Now, I don't love their offensive line, but the potential's there. They're going young guys. 4 of the 5 guys they picked within the last 2 years of the draft, this year or last year, besides their center. So, and even if you go to the bench, they have like a younger player in Michael Dieter. So, I like what they're doing. I like them putting capital towards it. It's just the players, we need to see them develop, potentially. So they have Austin Jackson at left tackle, who they picked in the first round last year. And we knew that he was going to be a raw guy who needed some time to develop. Didn't necessarily perform great as a rookie. I kind of felt when they picked him, I think it was like 18 or number 20, like borderline 20s, top 20. I thought that was a bit of a reach, but at the same time, he was about the best tackle available, at least one of them, and they picked positional need, I feel like, at that spot compared to best player available. So he'll end up being a decent tackle. I personally don't think he's ever going to be like a franchise left tackle, and they could eventually look to move on from him, but I don't know. I just don't love that there at left tackle, but he at least has some upside, kind of a boomer bust player. I liked Solomon Kinley coming out of Georgia last year, so he has potential at guard. I think he majority played right guard last year because they had Eric Flowers, who they signed to a big deal, played him at left guard because that was where he succeeded in Washington versus when he played left tackle at in New York. And so then they flipped him back to Washington this offseason. So I think Solomon Kinley played right right guard, and so they have to move him over to left. They bring in Matt Skura at center, which was a great get. I mean, that was a big weakness, I feel like, for them, if they didn't bring him in. So that makes a lot of sense, kind of that veteran on the offensive line. So that fits really well. I like them bringing that in. I think they had Ted Karras for the past few years, so that's a huge upgrade to me. I think Skura is a much better player. And I do want to talk about this right side of the line, kind of a wild card. Robert Hunt, they chose last year out of Louisiana. I viewed him as a guard coming out, and that's finally where they play him. Because of positional need last year, they had to play him at right tackle, but he's much better suited for guard. And so I truly think that this is a much better spot for him, and he's going to be a startable player now with some upside. And I think it just fits their offense much better. It fills a hole, and it will allow their offense to succeed more. But then you also have to consider them transitioning Liam Eichenberg to exclusively right tackle, realistically, if they want their best starting line there. I know that they have DJ Fluker and Jesse Davis, who are both guys that are veterans that could play right guard or right tackle. So you could see that. I think that will be a struggle for them moving him to right tackle. And then you also have DJ Fluker, as I mentioned, and Jesse Davis there if you need. But I see them more as just veterans to be on the bench. And then Michael Dieter is a center who has not necessarily developed very well out of Wisconsin yet, but you're maybe hoping for something from him. And then they also brought in Jermaine Illuminor just to be a bench player. So I only have them keeping 9 offensive linemen. I've kept some of the previous teams 10, but I only have them keeping 9 in this situation. And then on the practice squad, I have them keeping their late round pick, Larnell Coleman, and then Timon Paris, who played in Washington. And I think those two will be depth players. I also have them cutting a bunch of veterans on the bench because I just don't see the space basically for them. The top 3 there would be Adam Pankey, Cameron Tom, and Tyler Mars, but I just don't see the space for them. So overall, this is a pretty good offensive line room, but it's pretty young. You're looking for these guys to develop. So another reason, it's probably them and Tua that are reasons why I don't have them incredibly high, just because within a few years they'll be really, really good, but at the moment they're not particularly special. Now let's jump onto the defense, and I kind of had to format the slides a little differently this time because their scheme is so unique. It's kind of a hybrid between different schemes, so guys are being played kind of all over the field. And so I went with what they have listed on their website for their roster, the transition guys. But it's kind of just a weird fit. Like, for example, I'll talk about, Emmanuel Ogbah is going to be their top pass rusher. Their other pass rusher is going to be Jalen Phillips. But it's just weird that they have Ogbah listed as the defensive end, or defensive line, basically. And then they have Jalen Phillips fit at linebacker, which makes sense because Jalen Phillips is a quicker guy, but he can't cover it all, so he's going to be playing, that quick pass rush. But so that's what you'll kind of see. I'm just almost going to talk about this defense as a unit. So this defensive line is pretty much their defensive ends and their defensive tackles combined. And personally, they have Wilkins probably going to play D end. He's probably closer to a D tackle. So you just, like I said, I'm going to talk about the players kind of in general. So let's start with Christian Wilkins, who they took out of Clemson a few years ago. I think he started to develop. He's a pretty good player. He's never going to be an elite guy, but a startable player who they might want to give an extension to. I feel like he's performed pretty well for this team. They also have Raekwon Davis, who they picked out of Alabama. He's starting to develop as well. So those are 2 guys that might be the future of this defensive line that are starting to develop and can play pretty well. As I mentioned, Emmanuel Ogbah, kind of a shock. He's actually performed pretty well for this team. But like I said, he's a pass rusher. He's not close to Wilkins or Davis. So he's going to be trying to rush the quarterback. Like I said, kind of a surprise. Jason Strowbridge, who I liked coming out of North Carolina last year, kind of an in-between guy, probably looking to rush the passer, though, most of the time. So he's a depth piece. on the defensive line. They also bring in Adam Butler, who I thought was a great pickup overall to bring him in from New England, knows the system because, Brian Flores is here from New England. Also, John Jenkins is one I have barely making the team, but he is a defensive tackle who they, picked up off the street, and he's actually performed relatively well for this team. And they also have Zach Sealer, who is another player who is an NFL roster guy who spent some time with the Ravens. So if we talk about this as a unit, it's pretty good. As I mentioned, a bunch of different skill sets because Agba is more of a pass rusher compared to everybody else. But pretty good depth on this defensive line if you were to go with these 7 guys. You also, on the practice squad, have them keeping Jonathan Ledbetter. And then Benito Jones is like that last guy on the practice squad. So somebody else could potentially take that spot. But I have them cutting Tyshawn Render and Jerome Johnson. So normally I would, break it down, but I'm kind of just going to transition into the linebackers and then talk about their whole front 7 type of unit, because starting with, I tried to format it with, your kind of outside linebackers, your middle, and then your outside linebacker again. But it's just inconsistent again, because looking at it, I view Jalen Phillips and Shaquem Griffin as kind of pass rushers, as guys that will line up on the edge and try to rush the quarterback. I mean, that's what Shaquem Griffin did all in college. And Jalen Phillips last year was an absolute monster. I'm going to talk in depth with him, but it's an interesting scheme. So, like I said, it might be inconsistent on the visuals, but it works. It works because they have a guy like Jalen Phillips on the edge to go opposite Emmanuel Ogbah. Okay, Jalen Phillips, I know had the injury concerns, the retirement concerns, but oh my goodness, this dude is one of the highest upside players in this year's draft. I actually had him ranked higher than Jalen Waddle. This dude's upside is phenomenal. His size is just so ideal. He has absolutely phenomenal size. But his pass rush moves are actually pretty strong. He has a variety of moves that he can use to rush the quarterback, but his size overall is just what you need. His upside is so phenomenal, and his motor just does not let up. He just keeps going and going. So he only spent 1 year in Miami, but he had so many great plays. So he is absolutely unbelievable that I feel like there in 5 years could actually end up seeing Jalen Phillips being a better pick than Jalen Waddle. They also paid Jerome Baker recently with an extension, deservingly so. He's performed absolutely well. I think his upside is phenomenal, and is a leader on this defense at this point. He's been a leader in this defense and has performed up to it phenomenally. And then I actually liked their trade. They traded Benardrick McKinney and Shaq Lawson, not straight up, it might have been actually straight up, but pretty much those were the pieces of it, and I like that a lot. I think it was a mistake by Houston to let go of Benardrick McKinney, and I think people underrate him at this point. I feel like some people have guys like Vince Beagle or Landon Roberts over him in the scheme, but no, Benardrick McKinney is a very good football player that can be in the rotation here at this linebacker spot. So I absolutely love that. Not a huge fan of their other outside linebacker spot of Andrew Van Ginkel. He has definitely performed relatively well, given where he started. But I also liked them bringing in this other depth with Brendan Scarlett, also from Houston, who has just kind of been a role player for them for a long time. And then Shaquem Griffin, I thought was an absolutely great choice. I mean, he is a decent player, and to do all that with only one hand is just unbelievable. I feel like he still has something to prove, and he can at least be a great special teams player. But like I said, I'd actually be, letting him get in on the pass rush. So I like that a lot, given the depth. So their outside linebackers are great, and then also their depth at middle linebacker is great as well. I mean, Vince Beagle has performed relatively well when he's on the field, and then Landon Roberts, who they brought in from New England, has performed well also because he knows the scheme. So kind of to conclude their front 7, their entire group, it works great. Who would I say are their starters, really? I mean, it's going to be probably a majority time if you pick a front 7, you're going to go with Wilkins and Raekwon Davis kind of in the middle, but then on the outside, you're going to put Ogbah and Phillips. And then in the back, I feel like they should go with Jerome Baker, Benardrick McKinney, and Andrew Van Ginkel, or maybe some combination of Scarlett, Beagle, or Roberts potentially, and have Shaquem Griffin be a rotational pass rusher behind Phillips and Agba. So as a unit, this is very, very strong. I like the way this team will play together, and I absolutely love that front seven overall. So now if we jump to the corners, another position that I like a lot, but there's a wild card in this mix, and that is Xavier Howard. Now, I recently talked on my podcast, the Redzone Review, if you want to check that out on Spotify, Apple. Quick little plug. I talked about Xavier Howard wanting a trade, and at this point, I think he is pretty much out. I mean, he's out there. He put a post out. He didn't just request a trade this offseason that just didn't go through. He put a post out saying, I want out. So I have his name in yellow because it's not a certainty. And here's what I'm just going to say right away. Even though I have a Crevan LeBlanc being cut over some other guys, if Xavier Howard does not play for this team and they trade him, slot Crevan LeBlanc in there as a corner on this roster. And that's probably why they brought somebody in like Crevan LeBlanc, who has proven to be a startable player. But Xavier Howard, first let's talk if he's on this team. I would, with no doubt, call him a top 5 corner in football, potentially top 3. Like, if you go by interceptions, too, I know that's not the goal of his stats, but, I mean, when you have that many interceptions, it's unbelievable. But he is a lockdown guy, and I think, deserves what he maybe is asking for. I was shocked, though, just because of what he has had, that he is wanting out so quickly. But he's a great player, and I understand that. But if they were to trade him, like I said, they might be missing some depth there. I mean, Byron Jones, I feel fine with as a number 1, but then it's who they'd have be the number 2. Because I don't think Igbenogany is right there right now. Coleman is a nickel slot guy. You'd probably have Jason McCourty step up there, and that's okay. But if Xavier Howard is in the mix, this is like an unbelievable defense, and this is one of the best. You take him away, and it goes down a bit. So like I said, they have Byron Jones, who they paid a ton of money for. He is a good player at this point. I don't know if it was always worth that money they gave him, but he can be the number 1 corner if Xavier does choose to leave. As I said, Justin Coleman going to be your slot guy, get in different packages. I love that signing. He, I think, played pretty well he at one point was in New England, then he was in Seattle, where he started to play pretty well, and then they decided to let him go in Detroit. So I think it was a great signing to bring up some depth and be your slot guy. As I mentioned, they have Noah Igbenogany, who they picked in the first round out of Auburn last year. I don't think he's fully developed yet. I don't know if he's a startable guy right now. So they do bring in Jason McCourty, so a pretty good signing there. As I mentioned, if Xavier were to leave, I think Jason McCourty would be the one to step into that second corner role, and I think that would be okay for that. They also have Nick Needham, who's a very underrated player. He is actually performed pretty well and on the field, so he, I think, makes the roster, and even if Xavier lets go and they bring in Crevan LeBlanc, I'm going to talk about him first before the practice squad guys. But Crevan LeBlanc is still a startable player. I love them bringing him in for insurance in case Xavier Howard. I just feel like they'd rather keep a younger guy like Nick Needham. But definitely watch out for him if Xavier were to leave, and he could be in the rotation. I liked Javaris Davis coming out of Auburn last year. I think he can be a slot guy, a developmental guy on the practice squad for them. They also have Jamal Perry, who's been in the system for a number of years, can be a depth guy. I liked them also bringing in Terrell Williams, who the Saints ended up cutting as an undrafted free agent this year. Just as depth, I just don't see him making the team, but you could potentially put him over Benito Jones on the practice squad. I just felt like they maybe needed more depth on the D-line. And then the rest, I just don't think are NFL-level players. So the corner room, it goes one of two ways. It's good no matter what, but it goes from good to elite if you have Xavier Howard, but it seems as though he may want out. So a decent corner room, and let's close it out with the defense with the safety room. Probably their weakest spot on defense, but it's not bad. I mean, so they have Eric Rowe, kind of a converted corner, spent some time in New England. He's been in the system here, kind of transitioned to a strong safety. He's a startable player. Not bad. I mean, he's decent at this point in his career. I also love them bringing in Javon Holland, a top few safety in this draft, who could maybe even get in as a slot corner in different packages on this team. They might start Clayton Fejedelem right away, though, but I feel like Clayton Fejedelem is a special teams player more so than a startable safety. But then you also could maybe just switch it with Brandon Jones. I don't know if Brandon Jones is ready to take that starting role right now, but they picked him in like the 4th round, and actually it may have been the 3rd round. Like, I thought it was an overdraft at the time, but he was worth about a 4th round pick. So you could potentially see him take a step up and maybe just start right away and have Holland be in the rotation. And then the future safety combo could be Holland and Jones potentially there. So I like this safety room. I also have them cutting Nate Hawley, but I like the safety room because of variety of skill sets. But the upside is just not there right now at this very, very moment. But within a number of years, if you switch it in with Holland and Jones, I feel like that'd be better in the long term to do that. Special teams also, I mean, I think this is one of the best special teams unit in the whole entire league for what that's worth for, kicking, punting, and long snapping. And then to have specific guys like Clayton Fejedelem on this team is great, and Jakeem Grant and all these other players, they're really, really good at special teams, which is great because, I mean, we saw them pull off some crazy fakes over the past few years. And, Jason Sanders had a self-onside kick. I mean, there's so many great things here. But looking at this, they have Jason Sanders, who is, I feel like, a very, very good kicker. I would rank him up there in the league. They also bring in Michael Pilardi, a pretty good signing from Carolina. They've had Matt Hawk for a little bit. I feel like that was a really good signing, though, to bring in Michael Pilardi. And then they picked Blake Ferguson out of LSU last year, so they believe in him, and he's a relatively good long snapper. So with that being said, we're going to now jump into breaking down their schedule, and I'll predict how many wins they get. So looking at their schedule, it's not bad. It's kind of like the last one I looked at when we looked at the Eagles, where they have the same bye week. It's a late one. They close on a relatively good stretch. It starts relatively rough, but this is a decent schedule for them. I mean, first 2 games are going to be rough. I feel like the Patriots and Bills are still currently ahead in this division, but within a year or two is where I think the Dolphins will take a step up. That's what I'm predicting. Like, I don't think they're going to be great this year, but next year and the year after is where I'm going to start picking them as a dark horse playoff team. But like I said, I just think the Patriots and Bills are above, so I have them losing both of those games both times. But then, Raiders are a winnable game for sure. I've already revealed them. The Colts, I think are winnable as well. The Bucks are still just absolutely loaded. The Jags, Falcons, winnable. As I mentioned, the Bills are tough. I mean, the Texans are winnable as well. So you got 3 of those 4 stretch. I mean, also, by the way, if you are new to the series, I kind of always saying winnable just because I don't want to reveal too much about the teams and where they may be ranked. But also, if you see the 50s, those are basically games I'm saying are winnable. As in, they'll win 1 of 2 that are marked the same color. So, for example, the Raiders and the Jaguars go together there. So, if you're new to the series, that is what you see there. I also give automatic L's and automatic W's. We haven't gotten far enough up to really take a look at automatic W's yet. But looking at this schedule, keep going starting at week 10, the Ravens are tough. Then a winnable stretch of games when you have the Jets, Panthers, Giants, and then a bye week, late bye. As I mentioned, I like later byes for teams that are top at the playoffs. But if you're a middle team that needs to get on fire to make the playoffs, like, the Dolphins, like the Eagles we mentioned last episode, that's where I'd rather have a middle bye. Because I feel like those are teams that are not necessarily going to be great. So you might need that reset and then go on like an 8-week hot streak instead of a bye and then only get like 4 weeks. That is that. I don't love their bye week. But then Jets are winnable, as I mentioned. Saints, I feel like, are still going to be good. Titans, potentially winnable. The Patriots lost. So I have them at 5-12. I feel like roster-wise, they're better than that. Like, this is a very good constructed roster. But it honestly, when I ranked this team, it came down to the quarterback, the offensive line. Really, when you look at the whole thing, I just don't think Tua makes a huge breakout this year. But I feel confident in him, and that's why I'm giving him, Offensive Player of the Year, which I'll talk about the awards in a second. But I have him at 5-12, so I feel like this is a good team. I feel like they're a 6 or 7 win team, but this is a relatively, their schedule, they're in a tougher division. So, once again, talking about the awards, I'm giving Tua the Offensive Player of the Year. I know that I've talked about I don't think he's going to be elite, but he's going to lead this offense. And, Fuller missing a few games. I feel like the wide receivers are going to be kind of split, and nobody's going to be just absolutely dominant running back-wise. I do think Gaskin takes a step up, but it's not like he's going to take over the offense. And then Gesicki, I feel like, can just be a little too inconsistent. And then there's not a player on the offensive line I really feel deserves it. I'm giving Jerome Baker Defensive Player of the Year. So kind of shocks on all of these, honestly. I feel like none of the players I picked would be favorites for these positions except for maybe Tua. But I'm picking Jerome Baker for Defensive Player of the Year. They just gave him an extension. Xavier Howard is in the question mark. Now, let me say this. If Xavier Howard plays, it's no-brainer. Like, just give that award to Xavier Howard. Like, that, I need to make that clear in case in a month, 6 months' time, when it turns out Xavier Howard wins Defensive Player of the Year in the real life for the Dolphins. I don't want that to be, the case here. But if Xavier is not here, I feel better in Jerome Baker than I do Byron Jones. Those are probably your top guys that you're looking at. So I really feel good about Jerome Baker. I have Myles Gaskin, as I mentioned, breaking out. Like I said, I don't think he takes over the offense. He's not going to be dominant, but he's going to be, I think, very, very good, and is that difference maker for why this team will win at least 5 games versus, if they had a pretty weak running game. And then my pick for Rookie of the Year, as I mentioned, I had him graded above Jalen Waddle. Not a huge fan of Jalen Waddle. I also think just the opportunities are not there for him. I have Jalen Phillips getting Rookie of the Year. I think he'll take over. I mean, Agba had a decent year last year, but I feel like Jalen Phillips is just going to take over this defense and just absolutely become a dominant player in this league. It was an absolute steal for them to get him where they did. So I absolutely love that choice, and I think he will prove to be more dominant right away. So thank you so much for listening and watching to this video. It's really fun going through all these teams. I will say, though, I've officially, I think, come to the conclusion. I think I am going to be cutting the graphics. Unfortunately for this year, I know that is a huge part of these videos, and I think it honestly enhances the product. But with how much time we have left, a little over a month, if I want to get through the teams, I think I'm going to start to just having to record. I think I'm going to leave the schedule slides up just because that's a good visual. But otherwise, I think if you guys are obviously okay, I was joking with somebody okay with just watching me for this long, just watching me talk about the players, I think that will be what is needed to do just to get through this series. So with that being said, thank you so much for sticking through and watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.